Returning to inside the Philippines, many of the tales we share begin in a familiar way. A man boards a plane, drawn by something deeper, a search for connection, for meaning, for the sense that his journey isn't over. And there, beyond the journey, lies the Philippines, its breathtaking landscapes, its contradictions, its quiet sorrows, ready to meet him. Yet this story unfolds differently. It begins not in an airport, but in a quiet living room in County Roscommon, Ireland, on an overcast Tuesday that blended seamlessly with the one before it. There sits Brendan, a 65-year-old retired carpenter, a widower, a man who once crafted things meant to endure long after him, only to find himself with no more creations left to shape. His path, though, would lead him to the Philippines. Lovely's presence and a weekly Sunday tradition became his anchor for an entire year. Then came the covert flight booking, and an unexpected moment glimpsed through a distant kitchen window, something he'd never forget. The details of that moment aren't ours to share, not just yet. Brendan deserves to recount it in his own voice, at his own pace. His words will linger long after you hear them. This is his account, told exactly as he remembers it. I worked with wood for 4 decades, never the high-end cabinetry, though I dabbled when a client had the budget. Mostly, it was kitchens, staircases, built-in closets, bathroom vanities, practical things. After enough years in strangers' homes, you stop seeing the houses themselves. Instead, you notice the craftsmanship, the joints, the grain, whether the last builder knew their trade. I was 26 when I married Máire. We rented a small place in Roscommon town for the first few years while I saved. Not to buy a house, to build one. I found a plot on the outskirts of town and started from scratch, handling as much as I could myself. I hired help for the foundation and roof, but the rest, that was me. Every detail, floor to ceiling. It took a decade to get it right, adding rooms as money allowed. A proper extension when the girls arrived, a well-designed utility space, a workshop out back that Máire often claimed ate into too much of the yard, and she likely had a point. It was a solid home, that's all there is to say. A place I knew inside and out, every beam and fixture as familiar as my own fingers. Máire's diagnosis came in 2017, breast cancer, discovered too late. The consultant's word, spoken in that office at Roscommon University Hospital with his measured expression, stuck with me. Aggressive. We went through treatment for 2 years. It helped for a time, then it didn't. After that, everything changed. The landscape shifted, complete with its own rules and pace, and I won't dwell on the details because that's not the focus here. What matters is this. When her strength began to fade, I put together a ramp for the front step. I installed handrails along the hall, carefully placed so she could move independently as long as she could. Independence mattered to her. Later, when the stairs became impossible, I built a bed frame in the living room, angled so she could look out the back window at the garden. That was her request. The garden was the last thing she wanted to see. She passed away in March 2021, on a Tuesday as it turned out. The silence that settled over the house was deeper than I'd expected. There's something I need to make clear though, because I know what people imagine when a man my age loses his partner and then acts the way I did. They picture collapse, disintegration, but that wasn't me. I held together. I got through the days. I woke up, I ate, I took daily strolls, I handled the errands. I wasn't in low spirits, I need to make that plain. The problem was, I had no sense of what should come next. At 64, I'd constructed all I was ever going to construct, and the one I'd built it for was no longer there. The house still held her presence, a quiet resonance in every room, and I couldn't fathom what to do with that emptiness. 8 months later, I sold it. Some people struggled to grasp why. My oldest, Sinead, didn't voice her thoughts, but her expression spoke volumes, as if I were betraying some unspoken bond. The truth was, I simply couldn't stay. Each morning, I'd step into the kitchen and catch sight of the space where her chair had stood before I'd shifted it, or glance toward the sitting room, the window, and feel the weight of it all. It was the same place, yet utterly transformed. That's the closest I can describe it. I left with $158,000, more money than I'd ever had at once, and I emphasize that because it shaped what followed. My state pension barely covers expenses. The Irish system isn't generous, and I'm not the first to point that out. Meanwhile, this sum sat untouched in an account, and I had no strategy for either. I relocated to a rented home in Athlone, smaller, simpler, free of ghosts. That's where Sinead intervened, gifting me a tablet. She fretted about me living alone, and her solution was practical. She drove from Dublin, settled at my kitchen table, and configured it with tools she thought I'd find useful. Email, video calls for when the grandkids wanted to share something, a weather app, RTE player. She even walked me through Facebook, which I assumed I'd ignore, until a neighbor, Máire, whose husband had passed years earlier, mentioned the solace she'd found in online grief support groups. These communities, she explained, were filled with people navigating the same loss. With little hope, I joined one on a Thursday evening. She wasn't wrong. It was mostly women, heavy on candle emojis and religious language, which wasn't really my world. I'd been raised Catholic, like most in Roscommon my age, thoroughly, if with fading conviction. But I read more than I contributed. There was something in it, though. Not the prayers, but the honesty of people describing their experiences. After 3 weeks, I posted something myself, a brief, awkward reflection on how keeping busy fills the hours. I'd kept myself occupied, walking, tackling odd tasks around the rented place, and yet the void lingered, heavy as a weight pressing against my ribs. Not quite pain, but not nothing either. A woman mentioned it in passing, 3 short lines. She wrote that she knew exactly what I meant, that her mother had passed the year before after a long struggle, and that the hardest part wasn't sorrow itself, but the eerie, hollow silence of a home that once relied on you. Her profile name was simple and warm. The photo showed her outside what looked like a small-town church, dark hair pulled back, wearing a plain blouse, her face caught mid-smile, like someone who'd been asked to pose and had tried her best. I replied, and I'm aware of how that must sound. I know the assumptions people make. But before I say more, I need you to grasp this. It didn't feel like the start of anything significant. It felt like 2 people who'd both watched someone slip away, sensing a quiet understanding across the miles. For a long time, that's all it was. We exchanged messages in the Facebook group for nearly a month before she suggested switching to Messenger. Just for convenience, she said. Less visible. I didn't mind. Sinead had configured Messenger on the tablet, though I'd hardly touched it before. I shifted the app to the main display, and that was all it took. Our first exchanges centered entirely on loss, nothing else. She shared details about her mother, Perla, a name I found striking. Perla had passed from diabetes-related issues after a prolonged struggle, one Sinead had mostly handled alone since her brothers were tied up in Manila and couldn't return often. As the oldest daughter, she explained, she'd stayed behind. No bitterness, just the plain truth of how things were. In return, I opened up about Máire in ways I hadn't with many others, not even some I'd known for decades. There's an ease in confiding in someone far away, someone who isn't invested in your coping, who doesn't judge whether your grief is proper or fear you're becoming too much. Just words on a screen, no weight beyond what you choose to give them. She simply sat and listened, posed thoughtful questions, not the kind people ask just to hear you say you're okay so they can move on. The kind that made me realize why this conversation stood apart. The truth is, it felt like someone truly understood what I was describing. Not the loss itself, everyone grasps that, but the weight of watching someone fade bit by bit. How time reshapes itself around the sickness. How you stop looking past the next doctor's visit, the next medication refill. Another minor emergency. She understood that feeling intimately, and I could tell she did. The specifics she mentioned were spot on, the kind of details you only grasp when you've lived through it yourself. We had been communicating like this for 2 months before she brought up video calls. True to form, her reasoning was purely practical. Her connection was weak, causing texts to lag for hours, so she asked if a real conversation might be simpler. I agreed, though I didn't quite grasp what I was getting into or how significant it would become. Our first call took place on a Sunday night. It was already dark, and after finishing my tea, I sat at the kitchen table, propping my tablet up against the fruit bowl. When she came on screen, she actually matched her photo, which might sound like a given, but apparently isn't in some parts of the web. She was sitting in her kitchen, which had bare walls, a religious calendar, and a string of fairy lights draped over a framed picture of the Sacred Heart, just like the one that used to hang in my grandmother's home. Our conversation lasted 40 minutes. I can't recall most of what we discussed, but I vividly remember thinking afterward that it was the most normal, comfortable 40 minutes I had experienced in a very long time. That established our weekly routine, Sunday evenings for me, which corresponded to her Monday mornings, since she was 8 hours ahead. Before long, I could gauge the time just by looking at the light in her kitchen. Early sessions were filled with pale morning light, while later ones featured the hum of a fan and her still wearing a bathrobe. She apologized for it once, but I told her it didn't matter, which made her laugh, a soft, genuine laugh. Every week she would ask about Máire, and it never felt forced or insincere. She would simply ask if Máire had crossed my mind that week, or if anything had triggered a memory. I would tell her, she would listen, and now and then she would share something about her own mother in return. The conversations began stretching to an hour, then beyond, without me realizing. That might be the detail worth mentioning. I didn't keep track of time. Unlike most of my interactions over the past couple of years, I wasn't glancing at the clock. Around the third month, she shared a picture of the church near her place in San Fernando. Nuestra Señora del Pilar, she told me, an old Spanish colonial structure with sturdy walls, a broad courtyard, and bells that could shake your bones on a Sunday. It made her think of the church in Strokestown, the one I'd described from Mara's and my wedding. I dug up an old photo from my phone, taken 39 years ago on a disposable camera, grainy and faded, and sent it to her. She studied it during our call and said the two churches could have been related. I'm still not sure why that comparison hit me the way it did. She'd gone 5 months without ever making a single request. That detail feels important to highlight. No money, no help, not even an extra slice of my time beyond what I gave willingly. When I suggested mailing her a modest holiday present, she refused, said it wouldn't be proper yet. The refusal struck me as strangely dignified, almost quaint in a way I couldn't help but admire. And whatever we were, we still didn't have a label for it. It's accurate to say that wasn't the case. I wasn't imagining I had a romantic partner in the Philippines. Instead, I was a 65-year-old widower living in Athlone, with nothing but a tablet and a weekly Sunday call that had quietly become the anchor of my routine. I hadn't really questioned it, perhaps I should have, but it was the first thing in 2 years that gave my days any structure. When something like that's been missing for so long, you don't overanalyze it. You simply cling to it. The shift came around the 6-month mark, and I want to be clear about how it unfolded, because the sequence feels important. I was the one who brought it up with her first. She hadn't made any grand promises, nothing formal like that. It was just during one of our Sunday calls when she asked how I was holding up, if I was coping. I told her yes, mostly, but Sundays were still tough, especially the evenings. Máire and I had always had our own way of spending them, and now the emptiness of that routine was hard to ignore. Then I admitted the calls were the one thing I truly looked forward to each week. She paused before answering, then said she prayed for me, that she'd been doing so for months now. She wasn't sure what to call what we had, but she knew it mattered, that she cherished it, and she hoped I understood that. I don't know why, but her words felt respectful. She didn't press for more, didn't try to label it or turn it into something bigger than it was. A man craving grand gestures might have wanted more passion. What I got was thoughtful, deliberate. And at 65, thoughtful and deliberate fit me better than passion ever could. So I told myself, this is real. This is someone genuine. I had no reason to doubt it. The first favor came about 3 weeks later. She hesitated, apologizing twice, before finally explaining her nephew, her oldest brother's son, a 15-year-old, needed help with school fees and textbooks for the upcoming term. Her sibling had fallen behind that month after an issue with their delivery work in Manila. The amount was 8,000 pesos, she explained, promising to repay me once business picked up. She apologized for needing to ask. 8,000 pesos, roughly 130 euros at the current rate. I considered it briefly before transferring the money that night. No need to return it, I told her. Brendan, she told me I was a decent person. Those exact words. I know how that must come across to anyone overhearing. It could easily seem like an empty platitude, but the way she said it wasn't practiced or mechanical. It was the kind of thing someone says when they truly mean it, not when they're just repeating lines. I'd spent enough time around Máire's unwavering belief, always sincere, never put on, to recognize the difference. or at least I believed I could. Then, a month afterward, came the conversation about the roof. She explained it in detail. The deterioration along the roofline of her late mother's home was clear. Rainwater had seeped in during the last storms. She forwarded me a picture, a corrugated metal roof with a cracked seam, rust streaking downward from the split. After decades of repairing roofs, I recognized the signs immediately. The corrosion wasn't artificial. The way the metal had warped and separated was unmistakable. Faking that kind of decay would take effort, and there'd be no reason to. The repair estimate came to 15,000 pesos, about 245 euros. With typhoon season approaching, she mentioned her cousin's husband, a contractor, would handle the labor. She only needed the supplies. I wired the money. Naturally, I did. A person who dedicated their career to observing how water damages an unprotected roof wouldn't neglect their own. You're a decent man, Brendan. Over the next 2 months, 3 more situations arose. A medical visit for an elderly aunt, his father's sister, requiring a blood test and consultation at San Fernando's Provincial Hospital, costing 9,500 pesos, or roughly 155 euros. A gap in her market stall's monthly rent, after slow sales, totaling 11,000 pesos, about 180 euros, and school uniforms for 2 nieces, his brother's daughters in Manila, purchased out of generosity since he was struggling with rent. That came to 7,500 pesos, around 120 euros. Every request had its own backstory. Each one stood on its own as reasonable, and each was for someone else, something I couldn't help but notice, something that still leaves me unsure how to interpret it. Was there strategy behind it, or was it simply sincere? I honestly have no idea. There is a Filipino term I have since learned about, utang na loob, or a debt of gratitude. It is a family obligation that runs far deeper than any personal desire or hardship. From what I gather, an eldest daughter keeping a struggling family afloat isn't manipulation. It is just what is expected of you. It was simply the reality of the life she lived. On 2 occasions, I provided even more than she had asked for. She declined both times, directly, without hesitation or theatrics. Simply no, that's excessive. This is sufficient. The second time, she added, I only accept what's necessary. And I think she genuinely meant it, in her own terms. Her idea of necessity was broader than mine, but not insincere. Over those 2 months, I'd transferred around 4,200 euros in all. I should be upfront about what that amount represented for me. I possessed around 158,000 euros in savings. My government pension was enough to handle the rent in Athlone with some left over. A quality kitchen renovation came to 4,200 euros, an expense that wasn't trivial, yet not so large that it left a noticeable gap in my finances. I could manage it without any real disruption to my daily life. Perhaps that matters. Had the cost stung more, I might have reconsidered earlier. But I also need to be clear. I never felt cheated. Never once in those months did I feel truly needed. I realize that might strike some as self-pitying, but after 2 years of being useless to anyone, this was the first time since Mary passed that my practical skills, my knack for diagnosing a problem, figuring out what it required, and delivering it, felt like they actually mattered. I'd always shown care by fixing things, and Lovely gave me something to fix. I did it gladly. She never once hinted I should visit the Philippines. I need to be clear about that. The idea, when it finally took shape, was entirely mine. What comes next demands careful explanation, because if there's a moment where excuses wear thinnest, it's here. By the 9th month, money was no longer the focus. The transfers had stabilized, no fresh requests in nearly a month and a half, and our Sunday calls had settled into something that, intentionally, felt like routine. We talked about everyday things, what she'd sold at the market, a show I'd watched on RTE that I struggled to describe, the weather in Athlone, which, if you're Irish, can stretch into a full conversation. She told me about the roosters in her barangay, crowing before 4 in the morning, how she'd stopped hearing them years ago, the way you stop hearing a ticking clock. I told her about the jackdaws that nested in my chimney every spring, how Máire used to shoo them with a broom. It was during this time that small details started catching my attention, not in any dramatic way, but like noticing a cabinet door in someone else's kitchen that doesn't quite close right. You make a mental note. adjust it, and carry on. But you've seen it. The initial detail that stood out was the location. Over time, she'd referenced San Fernando, Pampanga, in different ways, the name of the barangay, the street close to the church. The market, she said, was a 20-minute walk from her home. Like anyone would, I checked it on Google Maps. The church, Nuestra Señora del Pilar, was exactly where she'd claimed. I scanned the surrounding streets, the barangays, imagining the route she'd described. One night, I brought it up casually, without any hint of doubt, just the kind of question you'd ask about a place that piqued your interest. I wondered if SM City Pampanga was nearby, since she'd once mentioned visiting it for a niece's birthday. An easy, natural thing to ask. She agreed. It had been a short trip, around 40 minutes by jeepney. A quick search confirmed SM City Pampanga sits on San Fernando's northern outskirts. From the church, she noted, it would have taken closer to 15 minutes. Not a huge difference, just a minor miscalculation. I noted it down and let it go. Later, I brought up Bacalar Church, the one nearly swallowed by Lahar after Mount Pinatubo's eruption, something I'd come across while researching Pampanga. The story stuck with me. It's remarkable. The volcanic mud had swallowed the church up to its windows, not far from San Fernando. I mentioned I'd come across it in something I'd read, and wondered if she ever visited. She had. Her family used to take her there as a child. She recalled stepping inside, where the floor now rose to the level of the windows, the eerie sight of the half-buried nave. Her account was sharp and accurate, so she clearly knew the place. The minor inconsistency in her response was likely just a misjudgment. People often struggle with distances, myself included. I let it go. Phone access was the next consideration. Sundays were dependable. She was always reachable, always punctual, always in the kitchen with the fan humming and that familiar light that hinted at the hour for her. But on weekdays, things were different. I wasn't bombarding her with messages. That's not how I operate. A few exchanges maybe, but never an endless stream. There were lulls, 12 hours, sometimes more, without a reply. She'd warned me early on, spotty reception at the market. The phone's battery was inconsistent. Around the 9-month mark, I suggested sending her money for a replacement. She agreed. 2,500 pesos, roughly 40 euros. For a few weeks, her replies came faster. But soon, they slowed again. Later, sitting in my kitchen in Athlone with a mug of tea, I realized she wasn't some office worker with a spare charger at her desk. She sold goods at a market stall in a small Philippine town. Of course, her phone would be unreliable. I let the thought go and returned to whatever I'd been doing. Another detail stood out, the photo of the bicycle. She occasionally sent pictures, nothing staged, nothing sentimental, just snapshots of her daily life. A display of vegetables for sale, the rooftop across from her window, her late mother's modest garden, which she was trying to keep up. In one shot, taken from the doorway looking into the garden, a small pink bicycle, though the image wasn't very clear, appeared at the edge of the frame. She'd told me early on that she had no children. It came up naturally when we discussed family, her brothers, their kids, her place in the extended household. She'd been clear, never married, no children of her own. I had no reason to doubt her. On our next call, I brought up the bicycle as casually as I could. I mentioned noticing it in the garden photo, asked whose it was. She said it was a neighbor's child's, one of several from the family next door who sometimes played in her yard. I replied with a vague, "Ah, right, sure," and moved on. Now, I think about that moment often, the way I steered the conversation away. The truth is, I almost didn't. For a second, maybe two, I had a follow-up question loaded in my mind. Something like, do they come over often? Just to see how she'd react. Whether her answer would come smoothly, or if there'd be the slightest hesitation. But I didn't ask. I shifted the topic. I've reflected on the real reasons behind it. The simple explanation is that I didn't want to raise unnecessary doubts. Didn't want to turn a minor issue like a bike into something bigger. That much is accurate. But if I'm being completely honest, the deeper truth is that I'd already been thinking about going. Some part of me had concluded that any lingering questions would be clearer face to face, not through a screen. A window can't deceive you. It only shows what's real. So the bike joined the same mental folder as the sporadic messages and the inconsistent phone responses, stored away, not ignored. I don't let things slip my mind, but I do tuck them aside with the plan to revisit them differently. Around 2 weeks after that photo, I began seriously looking into flights, Dublin to Manila, mapping out the details, routes, schedules, expenses. Whether you needed a visa, you didn't. An Irish passport gets you 30 days on arrival. What the drive from Manila to San Fernando looked like. I found a travel forum where someone had described the journey as 2 hours in good traffic, more in bad, and to go by private car if you could manage it, rather than the bus. I didn't tell Lovely any of this. I booked the flight on a Tuesday afternoon. Aer Lingus to Amsterdam, then KLM, the rest of the way to Manila. I sat at the kitchen table in Athlone with the tablet propped against the fruit bowl, the same spot I sat for the Sunday calls. I carefully navigated the booking process with the same precision I'd once applied to measuring wood, verified the dates twice, scanned the cancellation terms. The total came to €740 round trip. After hitting confirm, I stared at the confirmation email for a moment, then thought, well, that's settled. When I mentioned to Sinead I was taking a break, her excitement made me feel a little guilty. She said, "Dad, at last, where to?" I told her somewhere warm, still undecided. She called it brilliant, insisted I'd earned it, and offered to help pack. I reminded her I was 65, not 5, and she laughed. The conversation ended there. No more questions, just relief that I was stepping out for something other than a doctor's visit. The next week, I took out €1,500 in cash from the post office, then exchanged part of it for Philippine pesos at a bureau in Athlone. I received a less than ideal conversion rate, though that wasn't why I was heading to the Philippines. My old travel wallet, last used on a 2014 anniversary trip to Portugal Máire, had been tucked away in a drawer. Between booking the flight and departure, I filled the days with the same deliberate focus I apply to most things. I researched Manila, Pampanga, and what to expect at Naya, which, by all reports, was an ordeal in itself. I stumbled upon an expat forum where people debated the drive to San Fernando and the region around it, and I pored over pages of discussions with the same attention I'd once given to woodworking techniques or lumber classifications, not obsessively, but thoroughly, the way you prepare before tackling a project. I also skimmed the forum's other posts, the warnings, stories from men in situations that, at first glance, weren't so different from mine. I read a handful, then reassured myself the distinctions were clear. Those men had been pressured into large payments, lured into financial traps, overlooked glaring red flags, far more obvious than a misplaced bicycle or a slightly off bus schedule. I wasn't like them. I'd been cautious. The comparison was unfair to Lovely, unfair to me. Some of that was true. Some of it I needed to believe. I didn't tell Lovely I was coming. This isn't something I've fully explained, even to myself until now. The surprise was real. I'd pictured her expression when she answered the door, the initial shock melting into something softer. I wanted to witness that, to give her something unplanned and good, but there was more to it. After years of learning to read Mary's face for what it didn't say, her pain, her reluctance to weigh me down or alarm me, I'd grown skilled at catching the unguarded moments, the look before she realized I was watching. I wanted to see Lovely's face before it settled into its usual composure. I might not have admitted it then, but it's the truth. The night before my flight, I called her. On a Wednesday, not our usual Sunday. She sounded slightly puzzled by the timing, but not concerned. When I said everything was fine, just that I'd wanted to hear her voice, she was in the kitchen, the fan humming, the warm glow of a Filipino evening behind her. She held up a bag of vegetables, bitter melon, long beans, and said she'd be making pinakbet the next day, the stew her mother used to cook. She'd mentioned it before. I'd checked the recipe online at some point, just to grasp what she meant. She came across as relaxed. No stiffness in her tone, no hesitation. There was no sign of unease in her words. She asked if I'd had a meal. I told her I had. Then she said, "You ought to eat more, Brendan." "You don't eat nearly enough." I insisted I was fine. She gave me a look that clearly doubted my words, and we both laughed softly. I wished her good night. She replied the same, adding, "Sleep well." Then she said she'd call me Sunday. I agreed, Sunday, and hung up. I stayed seated for a moment afterward. The kitchen was silent. My flight left at 6:45 a.m., which meant a taxi at 4. I'd set 2 alarms, a habit from years of early departures, a routine ingrained from decades of punctuality. I'd packed light, just one bag, modest in size. At my age, and with my disposition, 2 weeks in a warm place didn't require much. At the gas station, I'd picked up a small box of Butler's chocolates, the kind they keep by the register. I'd read that bringing a small gift upon arrival was customary, a pasalubong, and though I wasn't sure what to bring, chocolates seemed safe, unassuming, something that didn't imply too much. I went to bed at 10. Lying in the dark, I replayed the image that had occupied my mind for the past 2 weeks. The face at the door, the shock, the instant recognition. I thought of the kitchen from our video calls, the Sacred Heart picture, the fan, the light. I pictured the church she'd described, the thick Spanish walls, the courtyard. I thought of the bicycle, then forced myself to stop. There was no point dwelling on it. The taxi would arrive at 4, and I needed rest. I slept poorly, but enough. I remember the heat at Naya hitting me like a solid force, a physical presence. It was just past 7 in the morning, and the air outside the terminal was dense, humid, thick with diesel fumes, and an underlying sweetness I couldn't place. Men called out offers for taxis and other services, the crowd a blur of noise and movement. I kept my bag close, my head down, my usual way of moving through such things. I joined the line for an official taxi, clutching a scrap of paper with the address I'd pieced together over months of conversations, like assembling a blueprint from scattered notes. I'd cross-referenced the barangay she'd mentioned, the road near the church, the market's description. I handed the paper to the driver. He glanced at it, nodded, and we merged into Manila's traffic. A spectacle I won't attempt to fully capture, except to say that road markings seemed more suggestion than rule. The drive north took nearly 2 hours. I watched through the window, the elevated expressway looming over the city's chaos, then the toll gates, then the landscape opening into something flatter, greener. Rice fields stretched out, roadside stalls sold mangoes and mysterious plastic-wrapped items. A dog dozed in the shade of a tricycle. A basketball court, cracked and faded, sat beside what looked like a school. A rundown store with a hand-painted Coca-Cola sign, a group of men in plastic chairs outside at 9 in the morning. Pampanga was greener than I'd imagined. I'm not sure what I'd pictured. Maybe something drier. The fields were a vivid, rain-fed green, and the road into San Fernando was lined with trees, the air thick with the scent of earth and distant smoke. The driver spoke to me in Tagalog. I apologized, said English, and he switched effortlessly, pointing out the church as we passed, Nuestra Señora del Pilar. The thick cream-colored walls, the forecourt, exactly as she'd described, exactly as the photo had shown. It was real. I want to emphasize this. I hadn't texted her, not once. I'd landed, been in the country for 2 hours, was 15 minutes from her doorstep, and I hadn't sent a single message. My phone had her number. I didn't use it. The taxi turned off the main road into a quiet residential street, modest houses behind low walls and metal gates, bougainvillea spilling over some. A dog tied to a post watched us with lazy indifference. The driver slowed, double-checked the address, and stopped in front of a house with a vegetable patch along the side, green beans climbing a rough wooden frame. The gate was metal, painted blue, the paint chipping at the edges. I paid him, and he drove off. I stood on the pavement in the heat, my bag in one hand, the box of chocolates in the other. I looked at the house. It was the right one, the vegetable patch, the gate. I could see the church tower from the road, just as she'd said. The house was small but well kept, neater than some of the neighbors. Potted plants lined the front step. Through the open kitchen window, the pane overlooked the garden where the vegetables grew. Through it, the kitchen was visible, though not in detail. Only vague forms and shifting light. A chair, someone seated there. A man, chewing his food, settled in the way someone is when the space is theirs. I lingered by the entrance, unsure how much time had passed. Not long by the clock, but enough for the neighbor's daughter, around 8 years old, to study me with open, unguarded curiosity. Not judgment, just the straightforward fascination of a child who notices something out of the ordinary and sees no point in hiding it. I glanced at her. "Do you know who lives here?" She nodded, saying Lovely's name first, then another, a Filipino man's name, 2 syllables, before adding a word I recognized from my reading, Asawa, meaning husband. I turned back to the gate. Lovely emerged from the house. Later, I realized she must have spotted me through the window, though I didn't grasp that at the moment. She stepped through the front door, walked the short distance to the gate, and stopped on her side. I should describe her expression. It was the heart of everything that followed. It wasn't guilt. I've seen guilt on a person's face, and this wasn't that. It was something deeper, something worn, exhaustion perhaps, and a strange, quiet resolve. The look of someone who had been carrying a weight for years and had just been told they could finally set it down. "Brendan," she said. "Yes." She didn't feign ignorance or surprise. She stood there, steady, and told me in a voice that didn't waver that her husband hadn't worked in 2 years, that they had 2 children, that the bicycle had belonged to their 6-year-old daughter. Every crisis she'd described, the roof, the nephew's school fees, the aunt's illness, had been real. The emergencies had happened. What she'd fabricated was the version of her life that would make a man like me willing to help. She knew the difference, she said. She was sorry for it. Then she added, "I needed help. And I cared for you. I know those things aren't supposed to go together." I believed her. I still feel both sides of it. That's the weight I struggle with the most. Not the cost, not the pointless trip, but the fact that I trust her. And I have no idea what to do with that trust. I lingered at the gate a moment longer. Then I turned back, climbed into the waiting taxi. I'd had the foresight to ask it to stay, because I'm someone who plans ahead, and some instinct told me I might need it. I spent 2 nights in a generic airport hotel, the corporate kind with identical hallways and a breakfast spread. The name escapes me now. What I do recall is the overzealous air conditioning, the TV with its endless channels, none of which I could follow except CNN, which I left on mute for a while before giving up. I didn't leave the room. Outside my window, a Jollibee was visible. I'd read about the chain before, and on the second night, I went down and ordered something. Chicken, I think. It was unremarkable. I sat by the window, eating and watching the street, my thoughts drifting the way they usually do, unhurried, unremarkable, going nowhere in particular. I didn't reach out to Lovely. There was nothing left to discuss. She had spoken the truth. I had listened, and that was the full extent of what had passed between us. No follow-up conversation could have refined or altered the first. Mostly, I found myself considering not the lie itself. I'd grasped that within moments of the child mentioning Asawa, but the framework of it. She had constructed something solid, using genuine elements. The sorrow was real. The mother who had died, Perla, had existed. The church, the market, the roof, all of it had been in genuine disrepair. I'd seen the photo. I recognized a damaged roof when I saw one. Every request had been for something that was both real and necessary. She had taken authentic need and molded it into a form designed for a certain kind of man, one who met practical problems with practical solutions, who had spent years in care and now had those instincts searching for purpose, who was isolated enough to cherish the Sunday call as a steady anchor. I don't believe she planned it all from the beginning. It wasn't that deliberate. She sensed something in me that served a purpose, and she made use of it, while also recognizing something she genuinely appreciated. Both were true at once, and that's as much as I understand now. I've stopped trying to separate them. I returned on Thursday. Sinead picked me up from Dublin Airport, though I hadn't asked. She'd been firm about it. She wanted to know how it had gone. I told her it was warm, crowded, unfamiliar. She asked if I'd had a good time. I said it was interesting. That seemed to be enough for her. She drove me back to the house in Athlone, where I put on the kettle and took my usual seat at the kitchen table, the same spot I'd occupied for a year of Sunday evenings. The room was still. I haven't shared the whole thing with Sinead. I'm not sure I ever will. It's not embarrassment. I've been honest with myself about that. It's more that this story feels like mine in a way most others don't, and I'm not convinced she should have to hold it. She already carries enough concern for me. Now, the numbers. Details matter more than vague impressions when you're trying to take something from another person's experience. Over 7 months, I sent Lovely roughly 4,200. The flight, Dublin to Manila, with only the return ticket used, cost 740. 2 nights near Naya, meals and small expenses, came to about 380. All told, just over 5,300. My account still holds over 152,000 euros. My pension handles the rent and essentials. Financially, I'm not broken. I haven't even taken a serious hit. And I want to make that clear because I think one of the biggest barriers for men discussing these things is the idea that you must be completely ruined to have a story worth telling. You don't. Losing a manageable sum of money and a year of your emotional well-being is still something worth reflecting on. What those numbers don't capture is far harder to quantify. For a full year, I had a Sunday evening, someone who asked how I was doing and actually waited for the answer. For the first time since Máire passed, I felt like my capacity to support, to provide, to take care of things was being put to use. Those moments were real to me. The structure around them may have been built on falsehoods, but the feelings themselves were genuine. And I mourn their loss, the way you mourn something that truly mattered. Because to me, it did. I stopped going to the grief group, not out of anger, or at least not much, but because it no longer felt like a place where I could be honest. And if I can't be honest somewhere, there's no reason to stay. If you're watching this, whether you're newly widowed, newly divorced, or just coming out of something that's left your home quieter than it should be, let me say this. Wanting connection isn't weakness. Reaching for warmth when it's offered isn't foolishness. These aren't flaws, they're part of being human. But your need is visible to others who have needs of their own, and the distance of a screen makes it easier for someone to become whatever you need them to be. So before you let something become the anchor of your week, go see it in person. That's the only lesson I've got. A carpenter's lesson, simple but easy to overlook until you're standing at a gate in Pampanga with a box of Butler's chocolates in hand. She asked about Máire right up until the end, every single Sunday. That moment likely felt genuine. You'd have to believe it did. This is Brendan's experience. If you're left grappling with it as we are, unsure how to react, unable to label it a simple warning, then you've grasped its essence. Brendan suffered a financial loss, not a devastating sum, but still a loss. He sacrificed a year of what seemed like connection, only to later gain a sharp understanding of the truth and its reasons, something many in his position never achieve. Now he's back in Athlone, with his savings intact, his health, and his daughters. He's managing. We share these accounts at Inside the Philippines, not because we view the country as inherently risky or its people as exploitative. It isn't, and they're not. The reason is simpler. Loneliness and longing are human realities, and the gap between who someone appears to be online and who they are in person demands real resources, time, money, to bridge. Start sooner rather than later. Make the move before you invest too much in something you might later wish you hadn't. If there's someone who could benefit from this message, pass it along, and if Brendan's experience struck a chord, if it felt a little too close to home, you know how to reach out. Look after yourselves. Catch you next episode of Inside the Philippines.